Okay, hello. Hope we can hear me. Sorry about the difficulties. Let's see. I believe we can start now. Just let me know if you are here with me so that we can continue. Hello guys. I want to know if we are here. So just yes. Very good, very good. Okay. All right. Since I can be heard, then we can start. Just had a bit of technical difficulties. I had to quickly settle down. I just got back from the Eastern region, like I said. So, yeah, apologies for the late class for today, right? Very sorry about the late class for today. Today we have one important thing to look at, right? Very important thing to look at. So, I won't waste so much of our time. I'll quickly go into it and then so that later we can watch the videos, follow it, and then yeah, we can see what is happening. So this is just our, I think this is our last assignment that we did, right? So we just work on it, a few more things, and then we look at the two things we are doing for today. Today we are going to look at the if statement, and then we also look at the nested if statement, right? So just these two things for today. We'll look at them using the same old data sheet. So if you have this old data sheet, right? I mean, if you've already submitted your assignment, right, and you have the data sheet with you, you can open it up and then we can keep working. Okay, this we are using the same data sheet for this work. Okay, so let's get into it and then let's see. So I believe from what we've been doing so far, we know that once we get our data sheet, we have to duplicate it, create a copy so that we don't work on the original data, right? Very important. Okay, so let me quickly change this date to the right format. Good. So today we are going to look at if, right? We look at if, then we look at nested if. Now in our everyday conversations, we use this if statement a lot. There's that we may not have paid attention to it, right? So anytime there is a statement that contains an if, we call that statement a condition, right? Anytime we are talking in our everyday conversations, when we say, if I wake up um, healthy tomorrow, I'll go to work, right? That is a condition, right? Because it has a if inside, right? Any statement that is preceded by an if is a condition, right? So if I am healthy, I'll do this. That means if you are not healthy, you will not do something, right? So it's a condition. Depending on the outcome, you take a decision, right? Okay, so mostly if statements generally produce a true, they produce a true or a false scenario, right? They produce a true or a false scenario, right? So what do we mean by a true or a false scenario? Someone is having an issue. It says he's having some security issues on YouTube. Let me just okay, right. So conditions usually generate a true or a false outcome, right? So if the condition you are saying, right, if something happens and it is true, you take an action. But if the scenario turns to a false, you take a different action, right? So if I wake up healthy, the true will be that yes, I woke up healthy, right? That will be the one of the conditions or the outcomes. And the false of that condition will be I woke up sick, right? That will be the false part. So if you woke up sick, you do say something, you do something else. But if you woke up healthy, which is true, then you also do a different thing, right? So this is true, this is false, right? So every time a condition comes, we are looking at two scenarios. What we'll do if the condition is true and what we'll do if the condition is false. Are we okay? This is very important that we understand this logic, right? Once we understand, we can work with if, we can work it with nested ifs, right? We need to understand the condition. Conditions usually generate two outcomes, a true when the condition is true and then a false part when the condition is false. Okay, so let's look at a typical example from our data sheet, right? And then we'll try to make sense of all these things that I've been saying. So let's look at column C, right? Where we have our write types, right? We have Uber Black, Uber XL, Uber Comfort, and yeah, I think those three scenarios. Now, we are going to write a condition in column K, right? Or K1 that should check if a write type is, say, Uber Black, then Excel should just say great, else it should just say false, right? So if, let me clear everything from here and then let's write our condition. Good. So our condition is that if the cell that we are going to check in, right, we are going to be checking, if the write type is Uber Black, right? If it is Uber Black, then, which is the true part, we are just going to print great write, right? Else, if it is false, we are going to say normal write, right? We just say normal write. Okay, so this is the condition. If the write type is Uber Black, Excel will print for us great write, right? Excel will tell us, this write is a great write. Else, if it is not an Uber Black, Excel will tell us it's a normal write, right? So anytime you are going to evaluate a condition, right, this is what you should look out for. The condition, whatever comes after the then, is the true part. And then whatever comes after the else, right, anything that comes after the else is the false part. Are we okay? So let's just keep these things in mind as you are about to use our if condition to test whether our write type is Uber Black or not, right? Anytime you have a condition, the part of the condition that comes before the then is usually the condition, right? If write type is Black, Uber Black, that is the condition we are going to be evaluating. Anything that comes after the then is the true part, right? And then anything that comes after the else is the false part. Right, so let's look at how to use the if function, right, in Excel to evaluate our data, right? Okay. So over here, our column heading should be say, let's say determine right? Let's say determine right. Evaluate based on the write type, whether we have a great write or we have a normal write. Okay, so our if function equal to, as usual, if, then we open our brackets, right? We open our bracket, and then once we do that, you see that the if statement start to show up in your how do you call it, in a pop-up, right? So it says the first part is the logical test. The logical test is what comes before the then part, right? if right type is uber black, that is the logical part, right? So we are going to say all these things according to Excel's language, right? Which cell has our right type, right? So this cell over here, C3 here, right? That is where our right type value is. Are we okay? So C3. So we are saying that if C3 equals what? Now we can say what C3 equals. It equals uber black, right? So let's just write uber black like that, right? If C3 equals uber black, the then part is what comes after the comma, right? So if you bring a comma, the very first comma after the logic statement, right, is our then part or our truth part. It says value if true. If you look in your drop box, just the small box that appears as you're writing the function, realize that when you bring the comma, value if true is bolded, right? So it is collecting the true parts of this logical statement. This is our logical statement. C3 equals uber black, right? So we are now going to provide, okay, what if C3 is uber black? The truth part of the statement. The truth part is saying that we just want to write great right, right? So great right. If the understanding is not coming, let's just keep working, right? We'll use another example as we are working, right? It will begin to make more sense to us. So if you don't understand now, just take your time. Okay, so we've written our truth part. Our truth part is saying that if C3 is uber black, then just say great right. What if it is not uber black, right? So that means we have to look at the false part of the logical test, right? So we'll bring another comma. And then it says the value if false. So we are now going to provide a false part of this logical statement, right? The false part is saying that just print normal right, right? Normal right. Okay, once we are done, right now we have written our logical test over here, followed by the truth part, right? Then another comma followed by the false part. That is if whatever we are checking in the logical part is false. Once we do that, we close our bracket and then we press on enter. Now, when you look over here in K3, you see that great right has been printed. Why has great right been printed? Because the value in C3 here is uber black, so it will say great right. But when we come to C4, when we copy this same function and come to C4, you realize that it will say normal right. Why? Because the value in C4 here is uber Excel, not uber black, right? So it is checking the condition. The condition says that if C3 is uber black, then just say great right, right? That is true, the truth part of the logical test. And then the else part, which is the false part, is saying that if it is not uber black, just say normal right, right? So that is what it is doing in column K. Now we can duplicate this formula downwards, right? And then we'll know what it will generate for the rest of the column C values, right? So if I just come and I double click, right, realize that it has generated it has determined the right type, right, for all the other columns, right? So C5, for example, is uber Excel, so it is a normal right. And another one is uber comfort in cell C7, it's also a normal right. But anywhere there is an uber black, like in C10, we'll have a great right, right? So that is how we use the if function to determine. Oh, someone says you can't hear anything. I beg, can you guys hear me? Lexco 590, are you hearing me now? Please, are you hearing me now? You still can't. Oh, let's see. Okay, let me see that. But my microphone too is on. Oh. Let's see. NK and let's see. Please, are these two the only people who can hear me, or everybody else can hear me? Yeah, our strength can hear me. Hey, please let me know. Let me see. I want to be sure it's not from my end though, because my microphone is actually on. Someone who can hear me. Yes. Okay. Okay. So let's go and end key verses. Please check your things, right? Let me write it since they can't hear me. People can hear me. Oh. Okay. So anyone who can't hear, just check out your speakers, right? Check out your speakers because it seems I can be heard. Okay. So I want to take another column, right? Then we'll do another of the if conditions, right? So that the more we do, the more we understand. We have to, this thing is not a true and poor thing, right? It's not a true and poor where you say, I've memorized the formula, so if it comes, no. You have to understand what you're doing, right? So that when the scenarios change, you'll still be able to do what you're supposed to do. So let's look at column G, right? Column G has the prices, right? The fare that the customers will pay, the passengers, right? The fare that will pay. So let's look at the condition. We use our if statement to do conditions or perform some conditional operations on them, right? And then we'll determine some outcomes. Now, like I'm saying, the more we are doing, the more we will be able to understand it, right? So let's come to column L, and in L2, let's call this column um, let's say price type, right? We want to determine the price type. Okay, so we are going to check. So let me write that over here. If the price or the fare, right? If the fare is above, if the fare is above, let's say 50 cedis, right? If the fare is above 50 cedis, right? We'll just say, um, we'll just say let's say like is it good price, so we say good price, right? Okay, let's say good price, else if it is anything lower, right, anything lower, we'll just say so we say bad price, or let's just say average price, something like that. Let's just say average price. So this is our condition, our logic test that we are going to be using. We are checking if the fare, right, if the fare is above 50 cedis, we'll say it's a good price, right? Else we just say it's an average price. Anything below 50 cedis is an average price. Okay, so let's look at how we can do that with our if function, right? So we just start as usual with our equal to. We start typing the if, and you realize that in our drop downs, we have the if showing, right? We can just double click, and then we have it like this. Now, realize that down there in our box, our dialog box, we see that the logical test has been highlighted, right? The logical test has been highlighted. What that means is we are supposed to provide that part before we continue to any other thing else, right? What is our logical test? Our logical test is that if the fare is above 50, right? So our logical price, we are going to start writing our logical test. And the first value in G, column G, is in cell G3, right? So we just select cell G3, and then this time we are not dealing with equal to, like how we did for here. We are now dealing with greater than, right, or above, right? So in our keyboard, we press Shift and then I think the full stop, right? We should have the greater than symbol, right? Okay. So if G3 is greater than, what is it greater than? It should be greater than 50, right? So we can just write it out here, 50 like that. Okay. So this is our logical test. This is our logical test. G3 greater than 50, right? If G3 is greater than 50, that is our logical test. We bring a comma and then realize that value if true has been highlighted in our dialog box that is showing. Realize that value if true has been highlighted. That means you are supposed to provide the truth part of the logical test, right? So, okay, if G3 is greater than 50, what do you want to see? Or what should we do? What should Excel do? What you want it to do is that it should just print good price, right? So we just put the good price in apostrophe. Mind you, if you are going to write anything that is not a number, you always have to put it in apostrophe. Okay, since you are writing good price is not a number, right? It's just a text. So anytime we are writing a text, right, it's always advisable to put it in apostrophe, right? But if you are not going to print a text, but rather a number, right? Let's say 1,000. You can just write it out like this. Otherwise, it's always good to put your text in apostrophe, right? So we are just saying good price. Let's just make all of that capital. Good price. Right, so once we are done, we close the apostrophe, right? Then we go to the false part, right? What if G3 is less than 50, right? What if it is less than 50? What do you want us to do? What we want is Excel should just print average price, right? So average price. Then we close our apostrophe, we close our bracket as well, right? That means once you close your bracket, it means you are done with the whole function, right? Okay, so let's look at what you have written and evaluate it. So you can evaluate your condition, right? To even know what it will show you before you even go ahead to let Excel tell you. That comes when you understand what you're actually doing, right? So let's look at what you have done. You are saying that if column G3 is greater than 50, right? That means it should print, if that is true, then it should print good price. Else, if it is not greater than 50, it should just print average price, right? So as you can see, when we look here in G3, we already know what should be printed, right? Because whatever is here is less than 50, right? So we should know what will be printed. That means you actually understand the function you are using. Okay. Now, if you take a good look at this function, right, or the logic that we have written, there's only one scenario that will be true, right? That is if G3 is greater than 50, right? But there are actually two scenarios that will make this whole logic false. The first thing is if the value is less than 50, like we have here, right, it will be false. And another thing is that if the value is equal to 50, exactly 50, that will also be false because equal to is not greater than, right? So let me just hit on the enter and then let's see. Look, we have average price printing here. Why? Because this value, right, is less than 50. Okay, so let's double click to duplicate this formula. Then you realize that 7 cedis is indeed less than 50, so it will be average. 51 is greater than, so it is a good price, right? That means it is true, the statement is true, so it will show you what's good price. Now, I want us to look at a scenario where the money, right, is exactly 50. This time, cell G6, right, realize it was 51.55, so it said good price. This time, we are making it exactly 50, and let's see what it will print for us. Realize that when the value is exactly 50, it's print average, right? It's print average. Why? Why does it print average and not rather good price? There's a good reason why. Like I was saying, this symbol greater than is not the same as this symbol. It's not the same as equal to. Okay, it's not the same as equal to. So greater than means that the value should be from something greater than 50 upwards. But if it is exactly 50, right, it means it will print average because it sees as a false. I beg, does it make sense? If we have a price 50, then we have another price 50 point, say 50.1, right? These two guys, they are never the same. They are never the same, right? So if we are checking a condition and we are saying that the thing should check if it is greater than 50, if it comes and it sees a value here 50, 50 is equal to 50, but 50 is not greater than 50, right? So that is false. Are we okay? 50 is equal to 50, but 50 is never greater than 50, right? That is why when we look in this row here, it is printing average because it is exactly 50. It is not greater than 50. So you have to understand the logic that we are using, right? You have to understand greater than, you have to understand less than, you have to understand equal to, right? You have to understand equal to. The reason why I'm not typing it, I'm not pressing equal to is because once I do that, it will still start reading it as a function, right? Then you also have to understand this guys greater than or equal to, less than or equal to. These guys are never the same, right? They are never the same. So if you tell Excel that it should check if a value is greater than 50 and it comes and checks and the value is actually equal to 50, it will still go and print the false part for you because 50 is never greater than 50, right? So there are two scenarios where this function, this if logical test we've written here will evaluate to false. The two scenarios are when the value or the money, right? The money is less than 50 or when the value is equal to 50 per exactly 50, right? Those are the two scenarios that will make this condition go to false. But there's only one condition that will make this logic go to true, and that is when the value is greater than 50, right? When the value is greater than 50. So let's understand this logical test before we can successfully use the if function. Are we okay? Okay. All right. So let's do another one, another if function again. We have to understand it, right? So the more we are doing more ifs, the more we are better off understanding. Okay, so let's look at another situation. Let's look at another situation. What else can we check for? What else in the table can we check for? We can also check for the ratings, right? The ratings, we can check for the rating. We will say that we can check and know our drivers, the type of drivers we have. If the driver has a rating above 4 stars, right? We know that the driver is a good driver, right? But if the driver has ratings below 4 stars, right, we can say the driver is a normal driver, right? So we can do driver type as our column heading. Okay. So if you remember in our assignment, in the last question, right? The last question says, what business insight can Uber gain from this data, right? You realize that we are adding more of those answers, right? So they can gain information about the type of rides, they can gain information about their pricing, they can even gain information about the type of drivers they're having, right? So more information, right, can be drawn from this, just this simple data, right? If you're a good data scientist, it doesn't matter the type of data, right? Once you know how to analyze, you'll be able to draw a whole lot of information from just simple data, right? Okay. So let's get our drivers, the type of drivers that we have, right? Whether we have great drivers or average drivers, right? And we are going to do that with the help of the if function again. This time, our condition is that if our driver ratings, right? So if the ratings are above 4 stars, right? They're above 4 stars. That means we have good drivers, right? So we just say, and then just print what? Just print great drivers, right? We have great drivers. Okay. Else, what are we printing? We are going to print that they are, sorry, we're going to print that they are average, right? Average drivers. So this time, when we finish this logical test, we can be able to tell, right, which of our drivers are good drivers and which of them are average, right? So as a company, if you know your number of average drivers, you can start training them, right, so that they'll be good. And then if you know the number of great drivers you have, it means you can start working on their remuneration so that they'll stay with your company, right? So something basic like this can actually save your company a lot of costs and all those things, right? Okay, so let's look at how to go about our driver types, okay? So still our if function, right? So we just start with if. We start with if. We click on our if to start. Our logical test is that we are checking whether our driver ratings are above 4 stars, okay? And we are starting with column or cell I3, right? So we just select I3 and we are checking whether it is above 4, right? We are checking whether, I think 4 too should be part of it, right? If we are checking above 4, that means if the person got exactly 4, like this guy, 4 is actually good. We want to say that 4 is a great driver, right? But if you make our logical symbol here an above or greater than, if the person has 4, it will still print average driver. Why? Because we are not saying that I3 should be equal to 4, right? So if the person has a 4 and we just put here greater than, right, it will still say the person is not a great driver, even though in our mind, we want the person to be a great driver, right? So we have to settle 2 scenarios. First of all, we have to settle the greater than, like we have done here. So the person has greater than 4 stars. He's a great driver. Then, if the person also has equal to 4 stars, the person also a great driver. So this greater than or equal to symbol, it settles 2 scenarios, right? It settles 2 scenarios, not just 1 scenario. Unlike the price type, right? When we did the above 50, realize that when the person had 50 per, it was saying that the person was just an average price, right? Meanwhile, to us, 50 is supposed to be a great price or a good price, right? Good. So that means we had to settle 2 things, but we only settled 1 thing over here, right? So in this part, we are trying to make up for our mistakes over here. So now we are settling for when the person has stars that are above 4, and also what if the person has equal to 4 stars per. That one to the person still qualifies as what? A great driver. Okay, so always understand your logic, right? Always understand your logic before you proceed to write your if conditions, okay? So we are settling these 2 scenarios, greater than and equal to 4. Okay, so from here we can move to the true part, right? If the logic is true, what should be printed? We want Excel to just print the person is a great driver, right? Just print great driver. Okay, we close our apostrophe, we bring our comma. And what if the person has something less than 4, which will make this condition false, this logic test here false? Then we are just going to say the person is an average driver, right? Average driver. Okay, we close our bracket and then we can hit on our enter. Then we see that this first driver here is a great driver because it has 4.9 stars. Just level 0.1 to be 5, right? 5 stars. That means this person is a great driver. All right, so let's duplicate our function downwards so that we know for the rest of our drivers whether they are average or great drivers. Okay. We realize that our first average driver is in row 6, right? Row 6, right? This guy is an average driver because his rating is 3.3. Okay. Now this time when we come to row 10, right? Realize that our driver here has exactly 4 stars and we are seeing he's a great driver, right? He's a great driver. If we didn't put the greater than or equal to and we just put the greater than, this guy would have been said to be an average driver, right? So we have to understand the logic we are working with, right? These guys, these logical operators here, right? You have to understand when to use them. Okay, very good. So that is for our if functions. So you can still continue and even do some if for these guys over here. You can even check over here, right? You can even check for this one. We can even check and see based on the city, what do you want to check? For example, you can even check to know those who work in the capital town, in the capital city, right? Accra is our capital city, right? So you can even check, right? The drivers that work in the capital city. Are we okay? We can check if any value in these cells is equal to Accra. That means the person works in the capital city. Else the person works outside the capital city. We can still check, right? So there are still more things we can do with our if functions. All right. Let's now look at our nested ifs, right? We'll look at our nested ifs, and then that will be the last thing we will be looking at for today. Okay. Why do we need nested ifs in our life? There are situations where we have more scenarios than just 2 scenarios. If you look over here, right, so far I've only been working with 2 scenarios, right, when it is true and when it is false. But what if we have situations where the outcome will not just be true or false, but or just 2 outcomes, or we have 3 outcomes, we have 4 outcomes, we have 5 outcomes, right? There are situations like that. Right, we always say life is not just black and white, right? That means you have more than 2 outcomes, right? Okay, so what about those situations where our outcomes are more than just 2? For example, our ratings, right? We realize that people who are above 4, right? We just say they are great drivers. But what if the person is like say 3.9? Right, you are saying the person who has 3.9 is an average driver and he's the same as someone who had let's see if there's someone who had 1 or 2. It turns out everybody had about 2 3, right? But no problem. Let's say this guy here had a rating of 2 and this guy here had a rating of 1, right? What you are seeing is that this guy, right, and this guy and this guy, they are all on the same rank, which is not true. It's not really true. Someone who has 3.9 is better than someone who had 1, right? So in those situations where we need to provide about 3 outcomes, right, that means just saying true or false doesn't settle it. That means we need more room, okay, to make room for example, if the person is 3.9, you can say the person is above average. If the person had a 2, we can say average. And if the person had a 1, we can say he is below average. Are we okay? So what about those ones? Let's look at how we will handle those situations, okay? Let's look at how we'll handle those situations. Okay, so our ratings, our driver types, this time we are not just checking whether the person is great or the person is average, but we are going to check whether the person is great, above average, average, and below average. So that means we have 4 outcomes. Are we okay? 4 outcomes. Okay, so let's look at how we will handle such a situation. Once we do that, we'll call it a day, right? Otherwise, we don't want information overload. Okay, so let's say this should be, we have driver type over here. So this should be, yes, driver types, right? No, let's say driver rank, okay? Something like driver rank, right? Okay, so let's look at how we'll go about it. Driver rank is more detailed than the driver type. Okay, great. So let's go on. We're still going to use our if, right? So we start with our if. And our logic this time will be that if the person had something above 3.9, right? So if the rating I3 is greater than 3.9, that means if the person had 4 and above, right? What are we saying about that person? We are saying that the true part, we are saying that the person, oops, sorry. Wow. Okay, let me start it. If, right, I3 over here is greater than 3.1, what are we going to say for our truth part? We are going to say the person is a top driver, okay? Top driver, right? Top driver. Then the false part, right? Our if condition makes rooms for the false part and then the truth part, right? But our ranking is about 4. We have about 4 rankings. We have top driver, above average, and then below average, right? So 4 different outcomes. Meanwhile, our if function has room for just true or false, just 2 outcomes. So how do we make room for the other scenarios? What we do is that when we come to the false part of this if statement, right, we can start another if there. Okay, we can start writing another if in the false part of this if. Okay, what it means is that we are now going to work like a Russian roulette, right? When you open one door, you see another small door. When you open that small door, you see another small door. When you open that small door, you see another small door. So we are nesting the ifs, right? We are putting one if in another if, in another if, in another if, all the way till we settle all our various scenarios that we have, right? Okay, so we can now put the next if at the first part of this first if. So we will be like, if, then what is our next scenario? Our next scenario is going to check if the rating, so it's still the same I3, right? If it is rather above 2.9, right? That means from 3 upwards, right? From 3 upwards, then what happens? That means the person is above average, okay? If the person has something above 3.9, the person is top. But if the person has something above 2.9, then the person is above average, right? Okay, so because we started an if here, we come to the true part of this second if, right? This second if. Right now, we are not working on this one directly. We are now working on this guy, this if, right? So if the person at 2.9, above 2.9, then what? We are going to say the person is an above average driver, right? Above average. Okay. Then we open, we bring our comma. Then if you remember what we did for this first one, right? We can do for this second one as well. So we've settled 2 scenarios, the top driver scenario And we've also settled the above average scenario. So what about the average? The average scenario. We can start writing the average scenario in the first part of the second if statement. It's confusing, right? But the more we work, as you are working with it, we realize that it's actually very interesting, right? Okay, so we start with the third scenario, right? And then we can start typing as well. So we've settled the truth part of this second if. Now in the first part of the second if, we have provided another if to take care of another situation. Okay, so this situation is that if the same I3, right? The same I3 is greater than this time we have top driver, average, above average, and then we come to the average. So the average guy will be someone who has a rating above 1.9, right? That means in the twos area, right? That person is what? An average driver, right? So average driver, right? Good. Then we close that apostrophe. We bring our comma. So that means once you bring our comma, it means we are now working in the first part of the third if. Okay, so the next if always comes in the force of the preceding if. I hope that is making sense, right? So every time we have another scenario, we put it in the first part of the preceding if. Okay, so our next scenario after the above average is the below average person. Let's see. If someone had above 3.9 top driver, 2.9 average driver, 1.9, sorry, above average and then average driver. Okay, let's above average driver. So below average is the next scenario, right? That's a very final scenario. We have how many scenarios? 1, 2, and 3. But you're supposed to take care of 4, right? So that means we are now at the very last scenario, right? The last scenario is that if someone has anything above, below 1.9, that means the person is an average driver, right? So we just go on. We don't bring another if this time because the scenario which is left is the last scenario. Mind you, we are working with 4 scenarios and we've taken care of 3, right? So in the last scenario, we just put that one in the first part of the last but one if statement, right? So we just go ahead and say average driver, okay? Let me take the explanation again. We are working with 4 scenarios. We've settled 3, 1, 2, 3. So we are left with just one scenario, right? Because it is the last one, we don't have to put another if again. We just put what should be printed in the first part of the last but one if, and we leave it as such. We don't have to bring another if again because this scenario is the last scenario. Okay, so we put the very last scenario in the first part of the last but one if, right? So we close this bracket. Now, you should take note of the number of brackets you bring, right? Mind you, when we open the brackets, we've not closed them, right? We've not closed any of these brackets so far. So what Excel does is that it uses a color coding to tell you the bracket you should be closing, right? So if you look at this first bracket, it is black in color. The next bracket is red, and then the next one is purple. So when I brought the closing bracket here, I realized that it is purple, which matches with this bracket here. If I bring another bracket, it is red, which matches with this second one. Then I bring another one, it is black, which matches with this first one, right? So you just use the colors to know the number of brackets you are supposed to bring up, right? So right now we have 3, 1, 2, 3, and we have 1, 2, 3. That means we've closed all our brackets, right? So we can now press on the enter keyboard. And when we do that, you realize that our very first driver, okay, this guy, right, in row 3, is actually a top driver because his rating is 4.9. It's a top driver, right? So if the company has some extra bonus, we can give it to this guy, right? It's a very top driver. Okay, so let's duplicate the function to the rest of the cells, and then let's know our various driver ranking. Okay, so we come here, double click, and then we can now know, we now have our first three drivers are actually top drivers, right? Top guys. Then our next driver is an above average. This guy is also an above average. Very good. Then this guy is a top. Then this guy who has a 2-star is an average driver, right? It's an average driver, and same as this guy who is also an average driver. So let's see. I'm looking for let's see. Why are these guys? This is an average. We have top, we have above average. How many scenarios do we have? Oh, sorry. So I made a mistake with the last guy, right? So if you look in our formula bar, let's select N3, right? When I look in our formula bar, right, we have above top driver, above average, and then average, right? So there's a mistake here. That is why there's someone who had 2 and someone who had 1 are showing above average, right? So let's deal with that scenario, right? So I think we have top, above average, right? And then the last one should be, let's see, the last person should be, what should we call that person? Below average, right? So let's just say below average. So let's make that change, okay? Let's make that change, press enter, and let's duplicate it again so that those who are supposed to have below average, like this guy, right? Right now, this guy is saying he's above average, meanwhile his star is just 1, right? So let's duplicate the formula again, and this time realize that this guy who has 1 rating, 1 star, is now showing a below average driver, right? Below average, which is different from someone who had a 2-star. Someone who had a 2-star is supposed to be an average driver. Are we okay? So realize that when I did a mistake, it's reflected over here. So the most important thing which I'm trying to stress on is understanding, right? If you don't understand and you just chew formula and you pour it out, you see the result, but you won't be able to interpret what you have done. So the understanding is key, which is very important, okay? So what I'll do is, our next assignment, we'll look at the ifs, right? We'll have more assignment to do with the ifs. Then I'll give us some which will look at the nested ifs, okay? But I want us to understand the ifs before we progress to the nested ifs. So our probably next two assignments, we'll be looking at the ifs, and then subsequent ones before Saturday, the next Saturday, we'll look at the nested ifs, okay? Sorry for not uploading our assignments for yesterday. I was all the way in the Eastern region, right? So I couldn't make time for that, but I'll make it up for us so that we have our ifs to work on for our day 3 and then our day 4 assignments, okay? And if your assignment hasn't been yet graded, let's look forward to it, okay? It's coming up. All right, so we'll end here today. We've looked at the if, and then we looked at the nested ifs. All right, so if everything is fine and there's no question, just give me a thumbs up. Otherwise, if there's a question, put the question here, right? So I'm also using my conditions, my if conditions, right? If everything is great, thumbs up, else bring your question, okay? So I'm waiting for your questions or your thumbs up, then I know we're on the same page. So I'm waiting for you guys. Let me see thumbs up or questions so that I know what to do. So we are using our conditions now. If you understand, give me thumbs up, else give me questions. So evaluate the condition and let me know. Okay, I'm waiting for you guys. I'm waiting. Or I should assume everybody is fine. Should I assume everyone is fine? I have about 38 viewers, so I'm expecting to hear from us. Any questions or thumbs up before we wrap up? Jacqueline gives a thumbs up. That means she understands. Mariama gives a thumbs up. So Mariama is fine as well, right? So after they've evaluated the if conditions, right, they all evaluated to true, right? So that they are giving me a thumbs up. Nobody has evaluated to false, which will mean a question, right? So I'm assuming we are all okay, right? If there's something you don't understand, either you go back and watch the videos or you just connect with me on our various platforms and then we'll take care of that. Bukari gives a thumbs up, so we are okay. All right, so we'll end here today and then let's expect our assignment, okay? Let's expect our assignment. Good evening, everyone.